Well, shalom, shalom. I guess this is going to be Brother Rich's Christmas video. Well, not actually a Christmas video, it just so happens to be Christmas according to the Romans calendar. So I just want to set the record straight here on this video in a little short discussion on the birth of the Messiah. When did this actually happen? Okay, all right. And you know, first of all, we know it wasn't in the middle of the winter because everything had to be timed according to God's or Yah's righteous judgments, which were spoken of through Moses and the prophets. So everything timing-wise has to be in line with his pattern of movements, which always surrounded his feasts and Moedims. That is when we were required to appear before him. Okay. Now, with that in mind, it's a fact that there are no feasts in the winter. Okay. From about October to at least late March, depending on whether you keep the priestly solar calendar or whether you keep this lunar calendar, lunar solar calendar, or whatever. The earliest that anything is accounted for is in late March, around the time of the vernal equinox. Okay? All right. Okay, so Yeshua would be born according to the divine plan and the divine will and the divine functions and movements of the Most High that are replete throughout Torah and the prophets, according to his schedule, his timing. There are no Israelite feasts in the winter, okay? So it would be foreign and extant from the Torah and the prophets for there to be a birth of the Messiah in late December, almost in the beginning of winter time. Okay, so, and I'm not going to go with Alexander Hislop's Two Babylons and go through all that stuff. That was good for the time, as Brother Will Gomez so eloquently stated, but subsequent information has come out in the last 100 years have kind of basically negated a lot of his claims. So we'll leave it at that. I still have the book. Might sell it. So anyway, so much for Hislop. Okay. It's fact that Jesus was most likely, at least prophetically, according to the Torah, for anyone who has insight into Torah, that Jesus was born somewhere around what we reckon to be late September, early October. And the Israelite feast would have been the Feast of Tabernacles, okay, or the Feast of Sukkot, okay. First mentioned in Genesis 35, Jacob went and made booths, Feast of Booths, it's also called. In the English said Jacob went and made booths for his cattle. The Hebrew word is sukkah. So the festival is called Sukkot. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, later on, that became an Israelite observance. That event that Jacob did then became codified into an annual celebration. It's quite possible that the Canaanites had a precursor to that festivity, where they would go out into the fields and harvest their crops for 7 days and stuff like that. There is a lot of things that run together and similarities and commonality among the ancient Near Eastern peoples. But we can rest assured that the Israelites would not stray too far from those customs. uh, being that they were, in fact, what do you say, part Canaanite themselves as far as religious practices go. Later on, they disassociated themselves with many of those practices at the command of Yah, and then became a separate cultus of their own, and created their own customs and things like that, extant from their time with the Canaanites prior to the going into the land of Egypt. Okay, so anyway, Jesus, where was he born? Why, okay, why did he go there? Okay, all right. We know that the story in the New Testament, though it has some sketchy places that are not quantifiable, in my opinion, it says that Joseph had to go to be taxed, okay? And it just so happens that that taxation of the Romans lasted for about a year and a half. It was more like a census. They were being evaluated for taxation. They weren't actually collecting taxes. They used they used the ancient Israelite custom that would be much more acceptable to them, because they were using the types of customs that those people were accustomed to, and that was that they would have to appear from time to time to be numbered or to be polled according to their genealogical histories and things like that. So they in their own kingdoms and government. So this was a good way for the Romans to be able to get maximum cooperation and participation out of the people, with exception of the zealots and the Sicarii, among whom Judas the Sicarii, not Iscariot, or from Carioth, or any of this other garbage that people have tried to plug into your minds, who really, need to be supervised while they're handling the scriptures. Okay? Anyway, enough of that. So anyway, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. And the first question you got to ask is, why in the hell were all the hotels filled during the feast days when they were commanded to build sukkahs to dwell in and feast in? And these weren't tents. You have to remember that when Israel was coming out of Egypt, they all had tents to dwell in. When they entered into the land of Canaan, they all had tents to dwell in. They didn't dwell in stone houses until they had conquered the Canaanite cities, which took roughly about 200 years for that feat to be accomplished. We'll put things into a time perspective for you. Okay. So you can just see how long it really was. It's not we're coming in and in 3 days we wiped out all the Canaanites. That's the kind of things that are being left in your minds. But even the Torah says that he wasn't going to do that. He was going to only remove the people little by little to try them, to test them, whether they're going to follow him or not, and and also so that the land would not be overrun by wild beasts. You have to remember there were lions, tigers, bears, all kinds of wild beasts that existed in that land in those days. They had rocks and slingshots and spears, okay? Bows and arrows, possibly. But that was pretty much it. Definitely didn't have the advantages of Cabela's and Bass Pro Shop like we do today, okay? So, anyway, Jesus father, Joseph, was returning to be accounted for in the Roman census, and he was also coming to Jerusalem to keep the feast at the same time. He's killing two birds with one stone. He wasn't even required to take his wife, okay? And under normal circumstances, he wouldn't. But if the Messiah has to be born in Bethlehem and not in Galilee, in the land or the enclave of the Nazarene, not a city called Nazareth, because there wasn't a city called Nazareth in the days of Jesus's nativity. There just wasn't, and Joseph's dwelling there. There was it was a enclave of zealots and Nazarites, people who were zealous for the law, for the Torah. So anyway, go on from there. That's why he took his late-term pregnant wife on a rough mule ride. I'm surprised she didn't deliver right on the back of the mule. All right. But the Messiah had to be born in Bethlehem, the house of bread, the house of David's father, Obed, and that's where he was supposed to be, you know. So that's how it happened. They were going to lodge in Jerusalem. Couldn't find any lodging. And again, why the hell are the hotels full when you're supposed to sleep in tents? They had tents to sleep in. The purpose of a sukkah, not a tent, the purpose of a sukkah was originally in Genesis 35 was to provide shade for the sheep during the heat of the day, because a sheep will literally bake in its own lanolin and fry like chicken out in the sun when the sun is high and overhead. So the sukkah, a four-walled pavilion of sorts, was given for the sheep to dwell in. That's why Israel, the sheep of his pasture, were to dwell in sukkahs for 7 days and blah, 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 right? Okay. See the connection? So, anyway, so he's born in a sukkah because there was no room at the inn. Now, the idea that the Messiah was born in some manure-laden animal stall, born in a barn, you know? Some people, they live like they were born in a barn. Some people act like they were born in a barn. Fortunately, that's not any place for an open cervix, okay? A newborn child who has to at least get a little colostrum out of his mother's breast before he's exposed to bacterial warfare in a parasite and manure and urine soaked environment. Sometimes I wonder about folks, how they read. Away in the manger, no crib for his bed. Well, he wasn't in a manger, okay? And that word manger can be translated food tray, okay? What was a food tray? Why, it was the little ground platform table from which the Israelites would set their articles for feasting, like their bread, you know, the bread of life, the show bread that is laid out for the priests, okay? See the connections? Can you handle the analogies here? Okay? I think you can. So they were the table. That word manger is mistranslated. That word should be food tray. And yes, a manger is a food tray for animals, but that's irrelevant to the point. The point is, Jesus wasn't born in a barn. He was born in a sukkah at the time of the Feast of Tabernacles. In addition to that, he was also born at a place called Migdal Eder. Migdal Eder meaning sheep tower. Sheep tower was the place where the shepherds sat high, overlooking their flocks and their dogs at night. Okay? That particular location was unique because it was somewhere between the village of Bethlehem and the wall of Jerusalem proper. Okay, so it was kind of like approaching out, we'll say, maybe 3 to 4 miles. Okay, which also that was a significant place because if I'm not mistaken, that's where Jacob had encamped. Similar, or I'll say, in about the time that his wife Rachel had died and passed away. Okay. So anyway, getting back to the point, these were specially trained shepherds. They were temple shepherds. They were overlooking the sheep and the goats and probably a couple of oxen that were destined for temple sacrifice. These were specific animals that were being reared for the purpose of servicing the needs for the temple, okay? As far as for their ritual practices, okay? Now we understand. What a coincidence that the Lamb of God that was going to take away the sin of the world was born in the exact place where only temple shepherds, because all the other sheep and goats and all the chickens and dogs and all that other stuff, that was all banned to the wilderness areas, out into the desert areas, okay? They weren't allowed to get anywhere near Jerusalem, except these particular ones were allowed because of the way they were managed, and they were managed by specially trained shepherds. Okay. So what a coincidence. Why? And there's nothing in Torah about that. This was just something they did on their own prior to the birth of the Messiah, during the time of like Hillel and whatnot. Okay. So it's an interesting thing that Yah even accommodated and used what men had dictated, or maybe even caused them to pass these laws and edicts so that everything got set up so that when the Messiah came to be born and then to begin his service to the Father, that men would be without excuse, because not only does their own laws say that the Messiah was going to be born in such and such a place and he would be from such and such a family and all of that, but it also says that he even used their own regulations, which actually buttressed the Torah and the prophets and what Moses said and Yah's will. So they don't have any excuse to rebuff and to challenge this man's credibility and his claims. So that being said, and this is just from a historical and a quantifiable perspective, and how some of these pastors out here in the world can, fly by the seat of their pants, make things up as they go along because it might be convenient for them, or they just keep things in a palatable, like a bird puking down the baby bird's throat, and that kind of thing is, easy to assimilate and all that stuff. Well, I'm sorry, if you're ever going to grow up and if you're ever going to be anything more than, a worker bee, okay, taking out the dead bees or whatever. You really need to start doing the studying for yourself, because all these people that have come before the Messiah and after, unfortunately, most of them have been thieves and they've been robbers. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. They know nothing of history. All they know is, just read the Bible. If it ain't there, I don't know. If it blah, 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 blah. And they're concordist. And they don't even understand what they read. Okay? So, I think we pretty well laid the hammer to that, and I've spent 20 minutes talking about this message, about this subject, I'm sorry. So we're just going to leave it at that. And we'll get to some of this other stuff later. But that's my Christmas message to the world. Food tray, a sukkah, not a tent. People are violating the hell out of Torah, living in the hotels, I guess. They're probably violating the hell out of Torah by living in tents during those 7 days, according to some. They should be intellectually honest that they're supposed to build a sukkah, and if that's what they're supposed to spend the night in and sleep, and that was the point for building a sukkah, just so everybody could have a place to, bone their wife or whatever, get drunk. Then there's no reason for the hotels to be booked out. And maybe Israel was more rebellious than what we thought they were to begin with. Oh, well. Anyway, enough that. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Shalom.